This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with Jinsop Lee, an industrial designer, teacher, and speaker, about his 5 senses approach to design. We talk about the creative process for designers and design thinking. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Jinsop Lee. Jinsop is an industrial designer, teacher, and speaker, and his TED Talk on the 5 senses approach to design has been watched by over 1.3 million people. His design background began at age 5 when his mother refused to buy him a Star Wars X-Wing fighter, so he designed his own out of Lego. Following university, a 2-year stint in the Korean Army, and a job as a suit-wearing design consultant, as he calls it, he founded his own design firm, Uncle Oswald is My Hero. Nita Song, president of IW Group, says, with creativity and enthusiasm, Jinsop Lee offers a new approach to problem solving. By focusing on consumers' needs first, his method delivers solutions that engage customers' hearts, minds, and souls. Jinsop, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, James. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Okay, so, well, I'll tell you, and it might not sound as creative, but after a stint doing my own consulting company, I ended up doing consulting for this lighting company that I found that they're doing something a little bit different with light. And the reason I found them was because after my 5 senses research, I started focusing a little bit more on the individual senses, and I started with light. I started looking into light and or sight. And when you're doing research on site, it naturally goes towards research about light. And I met this company that's doing some cool things with lighting fixtures and smart LED lighting. And I ended up joining the company, and now I do a lot of strategy for them. And the strategy covers design, and it covers marketing, and also other business aspects. So that's what I'm up to right now.
Because it's funny, I mean, it's one of those products, light bulbs, where it seems to have been for years and years, they just were exactly the same. In fact, finally, we talk about creativity, that light bulb moment, but the light bulbs seem to stay pretty the same. They got slightly more efficient over time. And then in recent years, there's obviously been a big change that's been going on in terms of lighting more generally, not just in terms of, kind of different, going to LEDs and things, but people seem to get a lot more kind of creative in their homes and in their workplaces with light and how lighting can be used.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, that's exactly, you're right. That's exactly what it is. I started doing research on lighting in general and the lighting industry, and I read this statistic, which is a little bit mind-blowing, but then once you hear it, it sounds obvious. In developed nations, we spend up to 80% of our time indoors. And the thing is that also means that most of that time we're under some sort of artificial light. But it turns out that lighting is something we hardly ever think about. And, doing the research in this area and joining this company has really opened my eyes to the importance of lighting in general. But I'm also glad that you mentioned that, the analogy we use for creativity is the light bulb. But ironically, it's, one of the few industries that is really traditional and conservative, actually. One of the cool things about working in such a conservative industry is that, any changes you make in this industry, they are far more disruptive than in an industry that's really trendy and in the moment. So the analogy I always use is I really like what those guys have been doing at Nest. And they began, a few years ago by redesigning the thermostat. Another thing that people never really thought about, but they really went out and designed an amazing version of the thermostat, and then the smoke detector, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to add, I have nothing to do with Nest. I'm not, an employee or a stockholder of the company, but I just really enjoyed that product.
But you're right.
And
I mean, it's one of those things. It's one of those things where it's only in hindsight, after someone has come up with, like, whether it's Nest and that, or there's lots of other examples in other types of industries and other products, where you kind of go, why did no one ever do this sooner?
Right. Actually, and that one of my professors, this amazing guy named Professor Beckman at my university, he taught us, remember, because, we were always trying to create the next massive thing. And he was like, design is not always a revolution. Evolutions are just as important. So maybe redesigning something or rethinking how the next thermostat works, or how the next light bulb works, or how the next, even like something, seemingly mundane as cat size on the road. Those are really important aspects of creativity as well.
Now, we have lots of guests on the show. We have musicians and artists and authors and entrepreneurs and all kinds of actors, all kinds of people from different backgrounds. But when it comes to creativity, in design, you're trained as an industrial designer, and you teach in industrial design as well. You have taught industrial design as well. I believe there's a certain approach to creativity, this idea of design thinking, a certain mindset that you go into working on a project. So can you maybe just talk about when a designer is given a brief, what that looks like?
Here's the thing. I think these days it's become, a lot more open, but traditionally when people thought of the design field and, whether it was industrial design or some other aspect of design, people thought of it as an approach to making things, aesthetically pleasing, or just making things prettier, right? And some clients I work with, they still feel that way. They just think that design is just the act of making things look pretty. But of course it's not. The way I explain what design is basically design is you're coming up with solutions to problems and it's possible that these problems are in any field, but you're just approaching it from a designer's point of view, a designer's mentality, basically. And that is the best way I can explain design thinking, basically. So we're problem solvers, and we're just using the tools of design, basically, to solve these problems. Now, most of the time, then, the solutions to these problems, they end up being, we're always thinking about the end user, whether it's in service, whether it's in product design, whichever field it might be that I'm working on at that moment. We're always thinking about the end user, and we're trying to make the best experience, the best all-around experience from the way something might look, but the way something might work, etc., etc. So that, honestly, okay, here's a better way to put it. When it comes to, let's talk about product design for a second. When it comes to really great design, I have this test, and it's called, and I make sure it's three things when it comes to product design. And the first is, when some design gets signed, before some design gets signed off, I always ask, would I pay my own money for this design? And if I can't honestly say yes, then we have to go back to the drawing board. But the second thing is, I call it the lost test. If I lost this, whatever this product might be, would I go out and immediately replace it? And if I can say yes, then that means that hopefully the design is a lot more successful. And a couple of examples of this I can give in my own life is, before, I grew up, when I was growing up, I definitely grew up at the tail end of the analog age. And, I always had a Swiss Army knife. And if I ever lost the Swiss Army knife, I would immediately go out and replace that Swiss Army knife. I think nowadays the equivalent would be the cell phone. I actually, because we live in the digital age, I call my smartphone the Swiss Army knife of the digital age. And if you lose your smartphone, because it is such a useful and necessary tool that we have, you immediately go out and you replace your smartphone.
And you mentioned that. What is that third thing? I mean, you talked about, so you would have to, design is great if you'd be willing to pay your own money for this this product's being created. The second one, if you lost this product, you would want to go out and immediately replace it like a Swiss Army knife. And what's that third component of great design then?
Yeah, James. So I'm on the tail end of a 12-hour workday, and it's 9 p.m. So I actually forgot the third
point. Let's make it one. Just actually, the third point. We're gonna improvise now on the spot here. We were talking about it. The third point could be the thing you mentioned on the TED video, which I think was very impactful, was thinking about design from not just coming up, making things pretty, but actually having a much more humanistic and holistic way of thinking about design, where you talk about this 5 senses approach to design as well, which is fascinating. Could you maybe just talk about what this 5 senses approach to design actually is?
Okay. So I think I always like to start with the origin of the 5 senses theory, which is, it was literally, during this post-coital moment with this, this ex-girlfriend of mine. And, she was really smart, very savvy. And, afterwards, it was almost a rhetorical question to myself. I just said, I wonder what makes sex so great. And then, she suggested maybe it's because of the 5 senses. And for me, that was a light bulb moment, literally. And I sat down and I started mapping out this 5 senses theory. And basically what this 5 senses theory entails is, when you think about product design or even different experiences in general, there's lots of ways you can judge or analyze or gauge different experiences that you have. But maybe a really important factor in analyzing or judging any experience, whether it's bungee jumping or whether it's using a product, is by how many of the senses it affects, or maybe if it affects different senses, right? So the example I use in my TED Talk is, we had this quick project to design clocks in university, and I thought I designed a pretty cool clock, but at the end of the day, you still use your eyes to tell the time. And, a really good friend of mine called Chris Hosmer, he designed a clock, and it basically worked off scents, different smells emitted at different times of the day. And, after you'd spent some time in that environment, that's how you told the time. And I realized that was a brilliant design because it used a completely new sense that people didn't usually associate with the act of telling the time. And so I really, what happened was I created this theory, and I worked on it, and I'm really glad that it has the audience that it has now, because I wanted it to be something that designers and other creative people could start thinking about. Is, when you're usually, especially with product designers, they're usually thinking about, tactile feel and, maybe things like user interface, and they're thinking, and then of course they are thinking about making it look prettier as well. But to start involving more of the senses for the end user experience, I think is extremely important, and it could make for a much better design at the end of the day.
So if we think about then, let's say a music festival, where usually you think about music festival, you're thinking about someone's designing a festival from scratch. They're thinking often about the band, so they're thinking about the sound, the sounds that they want to have there as well. They're thinking about what it's going to look like, what the stages are going to look like, what the different areas in the festival kind of compound are going to look like as well. But what you're saying is that they should also think about touch and smell and taste, and what those things, how those could potentially be engineered or reimagined, I suppose.
Absolutely. The music festival is a really good example because when you go to any music festival, whether it's designed into the festival or not, you already have so many of your other senses are affected at music festivals. There is the smell there is a smell around you. Usually it's because you're surrounded by lots of people, there is this strong, your smell is affected very greatly. Whether it's good or bad, it just depends on your location and who's around you, right? And then, of course, there's the sight. And then, of course, because it's music, your ears are affected. And depending on how close you're dancing with other people and, what kind of relationship you have with them at that moment, there could be the component of touch involved. And it just enhances the whole experience. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why people are attracted to these kinds of live performances. Now, what if you could inject some of those sensory stimulations into something that we don't, far more mundane? Like the way I always think about it is, what if in the future a corporation like Nike, not only do they have that really recognizable swoosh and their trademark name, but what if they have a smell that's associated with their brand? Now, this kind of idea isn't so far-fetched because, I did some research on it, and Singapore Airlines, for example, they've actually designed their own smell, and they gave it, a very markety type name. It's called Floridian Waters. I have no idea why, but what they do is they pump it through the cabin of all of their airplanes. And not only do they do that, but, those little, hot cloths, those warm face towels they give you during the flight, the smell is also infused into those cloths as well. And so, without realizing it, whenever somebody gets on a Singapore Airlines flight, they're enveloped in this smell. And, I think it's really smart of them because especially on long-haul flights, you have no choice, you have no option but to have this smell around you for the whole duration of the flight. I mean, you really have a captive audience there. And
I suppose like a lot of food outlets have got really good at knowing how certain smells anchor us in certain kind of feelings. So the one I always think of is a Cinnabon in the States. Whenever you walk through these shopping malls and if there's a Cinnabon and you can smell it from about a mile away, one of these, and so they're obviously pulling on the smell, they're pulling on the look and the taste, those kind of three things, but they may be missing out on using two of these other senses.
Right. Although, incidentally, I think since you mentioned Cinnabon, it's one of it's one of the few times where I think the smell of the food is actually much better than the taste of the food.
Yeah.
The promise is greater than the reality here,
But I suppose that kind of goes back to us being as kids where we're so conditioned. And in fact, it's funny where I had this test done on me recently where someone said if you hold your nose when you're having coffee, like you'll have a latte with cinnamon on the top. If you actually hold your nose while you're drinking it, you can't taste the cinnamon. The cinnamon has no taste. It's very much a smell type of sense that you're getting from cinnamon, not a taste type of thing as well. And obviously, great chefs, they know that they're always kind of playing around with these. And so there's the fatted duck, which is you may know of in the UK. Hester Blumenthal, the great chef, and he's talking about how to use all these different senses in terms of his restaurant, not just the usual ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, that is a really good point because I also, I'm always fascinated by Japanese food because, arguably, I think that, sometimes Japanese food, to me at least, I think because of the types of food I ate while growing up, it sometimes can taste a little bit bland compared to some of the food I've had. But what always amazes me about Japanese food is the concern and care they put into the aesthetic of the food, right? And, in many cultures, it doesn't always matter what the food looks like. People focus solely on the taste, but I really do appreciate the fact that, when I get served at certain Japanese restaurants and I see how much effort went into the way the food looks, it's almost a shame to eat the food.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was the best advice that you've received about how to fully kind of harness your own creativity and this kind of design thinking? You must have had teachers over the years who helped you in discovering your own path as a designer and your approach to thinking. Was there any advice that you had that you really kind of hold on to as a designer?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first one is, it's not like it's not a quick quip. It's not a one-liner but if I had to say who my favorite superhero was, I think I would have to say my favorite superhero is Sherlock Holmes. Now, I know Sherlock Holmes is technically maybe not a superhero, but I consider Sherlock Holmes a superhero. And not only that, but it's a superhero that he's a superhero that we can all emulate. So the reason being is, if you look at what makes Sherlock Holmes who he is, it's his powers of observation. And especially for the solutions that I have to come up with, to find the solutions, I first have to find the problems. And that's not as easy as it sounds. And Sherlock Holmes had the power of observation, and he used logical deduction. And that always fascinated me as a child. And I've always tried to emulate that throughout my life.
So when you're working now within, let's say, in lighting, you're actually actively kind of going out there, spending time, seeing how people are, how they're using lighting, the challenges that they have with lighting, the things that they don't understand themselves, maybe what's kind of going on in lighting, and just you're doing a lot of observation and you're being curious.
Absolutely, not just in lighting. And that's the other thing is, a lot of times, especially, my students, they would ask me, what makes someone creative? And, how do you answer that question? I think creativity, to be creative, there is no one answer. You find your own system, your own way of being creative. But one thing I am sure of is this, the whole act of creativity is coming up with something new. And the only way you can come up with something new is if new experiences are continuously being inputted. That's the only way you could, output some new idea. And I always challenge my students to do at least one thing they've never tried to do once a week, no matter how mundane it is. It doesn't have to be traveling to a new country. It could just be, seeing something, trying out, playing the harmonica, for crying out loud, but just trying something new and experiencing something different. And I think, the whole point of creativity is, I mentioned Sherlock Holmes and the fact that you have to observe things. And part of being a good observer is also trying the experience for yourself. And that's the only way you can really, know what it's going to feel like.
And you've obviously traveled a lot. You've, as I mentioned probably at the top of the show, you lived in the UK and in Africa and you're in America. Obviously you're now in Asia. In Korea is a home now for you. Have you noticed much of a difference as you've traveled around these different places, the different approaches, maybe even from designers, how they approach the creative process themselves as you go through these different cultures and these different countries?
Yeah. I absolutely have. In fact, I almost think that it's almost stereotypical, where I really think that the way that creative people in different cultures, there are some elements that are very similar. There really are. And I think, when it comes to similarity, one of the things I really like about creativity is that it is almost an international language, where if you meet somebody else that's creative, even if they're from a different culture, I tend to be able to find a way to communicate with them and have really, really interesting conversations with them, even if we don't share a common language. Whether the conversation can be in the form of sketches or, just doodles, or even, just folding bits of paper or just sign language. But in that respect, I really enjoy meeting other creative people and somehow communicating with them. But when it comes to the approach to design, yes, it is very, very different. And so, to give you an example, one of the things is, right now where I live in South Korea. South Korea developed extremely quickly. South Korea went through a war in the 1950s that divided this country to this day. And, up till the 1960s, it was very much a nation that was quite impoverished. And, in the last few decades, it's managed to become an extremely modernized country. And so one thing I found out about the creative process here is it has to happen very, very quickly. People are not patient. And so whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But one thing I do know is that design happens fast here. New ideas must happen quickly. And it makes sense because if they don't happen quickly, it's very hard that the ideas will succeed because it's such a fast-changing society here.
And I'm a little bit surprised by that with Korea, because from the outside you hear a lot about these. I've probably got the pronunciation. Is it kaibols, the large conglomerates that are very, very dominant in Korea? And they're related in different ways, shareholdings and things, and they sound like very slow moving types of things. And so when it comes, and I'm interested that you talk about design and creativity, it has to be a very quick, iterative process. Is that amongst both these large organizations and also maybe amongst the newer kind of more entrepreneurial companies that are springing up everywhere?
Okay. Well, I'm not really I don't really want to get into talking about the large corporations, but I think suffice to say, James, I've been offered positions at large Korean corporations a few times, and I've always turned them down, right? So I prefer the small to medium-sized companies here and working with them. And what I've seen from them is that for the companies that I've chosen to work for, not all of them, but a lot of them are extremely quick on their feet and they move very quickly. Now, when you're moving that quickly and you have to come up with ideas that fast and implement them that quickly, there are some trade-offs, obviously. The ideas are sometimes not as well developed. But on the flip side, I really enjoy how quickly the ideas come to life here.
And what happens in your life, or does this happen in your life, where you're working on a project, you're given a brief, but for whatever reason the creative juices aren't flowing? You're blocked and trying to think about how to solve this particular problem. How does that happen to you? Do you, as a designer, do you get blocked? And if so, what are your strategies for becoming unblocked and having those ideas flow again?
James, in my many, many years as a creative person, that has never, ever happened to me. Okay, no, of course not. It happens to all of us. Absolutely. I think I think I can only say what more to what I experienced before. But honestly, when I do have a creative block, I go out and try to do something new I've never done before. At the very least, maybe I'll sit in a cafe or a bar and have a conversation with someone I've never met before. And sometimes that is just the little jolt I need to think about the problem I've been grappling with in a slightly different way. And also, I found that just sometimes talking about what I'm working on, during the act of talking, I'll come up with a solution to it.
And do you have an online resource or a tool like an Evernote that, as our listeners just now are kind of listening to this, I'm sure they're really intrigued by which tools you use for your own creativity and your design work. But is there any one kind of online resource or tool that you really love?
Okay, yeah, actually, there is. So the one tool that I have been using a lot these days is it's on my phone, and it's just a simple app that allows me to keep a diary. It's a personal diary, and allows me to keep pictures and an app and writing on this diary. And it doesn't necessarily encourage me to share the contents at all online. I know that is what most people do these days, but this is just a little personal app where I can keep my own thoughts in. And that app helps me a lot. Whenever I get new ideas or whenever I just need to mull over something, I write down a few thoughts in this app, and then later when I go back on it, it does help me rethink new problems in a completely different way, but also just it helps me organize my life and keep a little record of everything that I've been doing on a day-to-day basis. I love it for that reason. And it's not something that I'm advertising to the rest of the world.
Okay. And can you name what's the name of that app?
Yeah. I think it's called One Day.
One Day.
Yes, something similar to that. Yeah.
If people go to jamestaylor.me and just put in Jinsop Lee in the search bar, you'll be able to find all the links for all these show notes we're talking about as we talk about some of these different suggestions, recommendations as well. If you could only recommend one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be? And I'm interested in your taste in music because I've noticed in a lot of your design work, there's a strong kind of music element going throughout that. You've designed some really amazing products for listening to music. So what would the recommendation for your one record and your one book be?
But it can only be one record.
Yeah.
Right?
And a record it could be an album, a record could be an individual song.
Yeah, I know. But my playlist includes everything from classic to hard rock. So this is a tough question. But for me, I always, sometimes during the creative process, you were saying when things aren't quite going my way, I like music that makes me feel confident and cool. That's really important to me. So, because I think that just changes my mood and changes the output. Actually, I found that a lot of my design is affected by the kind of music I'm listening to at the time. So if I had to choose an album that does it for me at moments like that, it would be the Beastie Boys' Ill Communication.
Great album. And what would the book be?
The book would be for me The Count of Monte Cristo. Mainly because everybody loves a great revenge story. And not many people know this, but it's based on a true story. But third, what I really like about Edmond Dante and the person he became, and it kind of is the life that, a good designer should follow. I'm not saying the actions that he did, but I'm talking about the way he planned everything out. He had a strategy, he had a goal, and he followed through on his goal with a great strategy. That's the part that really gets to me about his book.
And let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So all you have are the tools of your trade and the knowledge that you've acquired, the skills you've acquired over the years as a designer, as a creative, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. You have to start again. How would you restart?
I don't know how I'd restart, but I know what I'd try to do. Since I'm starting from the beginning, and there's none of the strings attached anymore of stuff I've done up till now, I think I would try to tackle a much, much larger problem than the things I've been working on. Right? Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy, working on, the business strategy and branding and marketing and, design thinking. But I would love the opportunity to start fresh and really tackle a much larger problem that's facing, this planet or humans in general. That would be, I think, where I begin from.
Very worthy goal. Well, Jinsop, thank you so much for coming on the show. Share with our listeners the best ways that they can connect with you and find out about all the different projects you have on the go.
Oh, okay. Just simply go on my website. It's jinsop.com. It used to be Jinsop Lee, but then I got a cyber squatter.
Oh dear.
Very uncooperative, so just jinsop.com.
I'll have to connect you with one of our previous guests, Karen Elazari, who's also a TED talker and is a cybersecurity expert as well. So I'll have to connect you with her next time. Well, Jinsop, thank you so much for coming on the show. I wish you all the best with your new products, and I look forward to hopefully using the products, the light products, and that you're going to be creating and innovating with. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.